Good morning, everyone. This is Jerry Alt. It's Monday morning, the third official day of our lockdown here in Illinois, and I'm going to take a few minutes to show you how to create a colorful background, how to substitute the background on an image that you've taken. So here's my beautiful model Tate from a shoot a couple of weeks ago. What we're going to start with is the out-of-camera image, and this is what I had as an out-of-camera image. You can see that she's very translucent. We have to deal with some of that. But that background, while it's other than the problems with the background stand showing on the left, is pretty uniform, but it's boring. So I'm going to take you to the image, which I've already opened up in Photoshop, and show you how we can move from here to a better looking finished image. So if you watch one of my prior tutorials, you're going to see that using the rectangular marquee tool up here on your tools menu will allow me to grab this area of the background that was bothering me. I'm just going to select it, hit the delete key, and then enter. And because I have the fill settings set to content aware, now we've fixed that space. Now there's a little crimpling of the paper here, but that's not going to bother us because we're going to substitute and take out that background. So the texture might be there, but it's so insignificant that it's not going to bother anything. Now, the first thing I want to do, because I like to do things non-destructively, is I want to create a duplicate layer from this background. There's two different ways that we can do that. The first way that you can do it is to simply grab and drag that layer onto the new layer icon down here at the bottom. That creates a second copy, and we can work from that. There's another way to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. And it's the way I work. If you're in Photoshop very much, you need to learn some of the basic shortcut keys. And the shortcut key on my Mac for creating a duplicate layer is Command J. So by hitting Command J, it happened instantly. I got this second layer, and I'm going to work on that layer. All right, so the key to making a new background is to separate your subject from the existing background. The way we're going to do that is I'm going to go up on my Tools menu again, and you've got a couple of tools up here. There's a Magic Wand tool and a Quick Selection. I'm going to use the Quick Selection, and instead of tediously trying to go in and select pieces and make sure that I've got all of her selected, I'm happy to report to you that in the newer versions of Photoshop, if you're still on version 6, you might not be happy with the automatic way that Photoshop does it, but Select Subject works really well in the newer versions. It's very intuitive. You see how quickly it selected this. Now, admittedly, I have pretty sharp edges everywhere but the hair, and I'm happy with this selection, with the exception of the hair. So how are we going to fix that? We're going to go to the next step, go up here to the top, and hit the Select and Mask button. And what that's going to do is go into an edit mode where you can refine the selection. By default, when you go in here, over here on the left, you'll see that the second icon, the paintbrush icon on the left, is selected, and that's your Refine Edge tool. Now, there's different ways to look at this overlay. I happen to like it this way so I can see the bright areas that were selected, but you can change that up here if you're more comfortable and you want to just see the edges. That's fine, but in a complex subject, I might not know which is arm, which is hair, so I like being able to see it a little bit different. You can go back to the marching ants, which is what we got when we initially selected it. I like working on overlay. So this gives me a pretty good view. I can tell well enough because I can see through it where her arm is, where her hair is. So I'm just going to take my brush over the edge of the hair, because that's the part that's bothering me, and I'm just going to trace around it, and you can see that I'm just going in here, and it did fix the hair pretty well for my purposes. Okay, so now what we've got is a refined selection, and you could go, if this clothing had edges, if for instance I've got a set of angel wings, if you're shooting on feathers you've got more detail, but this is good enough. We're just putting a simple edge on this. Sorry, not a simple edge, a simple background on this. There was a little bit of hair that extended out there, so I've selected that. I haven't messed with anything else. So now you need to save that out back to your document. And oops, I've got a little bit of my frame that wasn't selected. Good catch there. All right, now we're pretty good. Since I created a separate layer, I can just save this as a selection on that layer, and that's what I'm going to do. Click the OK button. And by the way, there were some settings for the refined brush and the like. You can pause the video, go back and look at those. I developed those pretty much from watching other tutorials, experimentation. Some subjects work differently than others. If it's nice, clean, geometric edges, that's one thing. If you've got a lot of blowing hair, then you need to refine those edges, but works pretty good for what I've got. Now, I notice here on my selection that I've got a spot under her arm right here, and that's actually hair behind her, so I'm going to go ahead, not confuse this, and go ahead and unselect that, if you will, or make it part of the master selection. The hair edges still look like they're not completely selected, but trust me, they are. What I need to do is keep this selection now separate from the underlying layer, and I do that by going to my select menu, drop down to save selection, and then I'm creating a new channel. I'm not going to confuse you talking about channels today. My good friend and mentor Scott Detweiler has a naming convention that I follow. I'm just going to call this new channel 1. Not trying to get too creative here. I just want to know where it is. Now I can deselect that, and if I come back to the select again, I can load the selection, go pick what I just saved, number 1, and it's back. So that's all we were trying to do, is save this part of the image, of the underlying image, separate from the background. So let me deselect that again, and what I need to do is now put a new background in place. So I'm going to go to my file menu, place embedded. There's different ways of getting an image in, but I'm just going to go grab this. Here's an image I could use. Here's an image I could use. She's got lighter skin and she's wearing white lingerie, so I'm going to get something that's textured but not too crazy. And now that's put that as a new layer. I'm just going to extend this so that I can get it to cover all of my image. I kind of like that, and now I'm just going to deselect it. All right, so what do? We can't see Tate anymore. I've covered up the underlying image. Well, that's the whole point. That's why you make a selection, because now I can bring her back separate from all the gray. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to select and load selection. I'm going to find that value that we had from before, number 1, and there she is, voila. Well, except you can't see her. Why? Because it's just the selection. I need to create a mask to eliminate the parts of this layer, this new graphic, that represent where she is. How do you do that? With a mask. So here on the bottom of your screen, you're going to see icons for new layer, new level adjustment, and there's one here for a new mask. So I'm going to hold the Option key down. Sorry, a little bit of a problem. I got to get back there. There, I deselected it. I'm going to hold the Option key and mask, and now I brought her back on top. All I've done is basically look through this layer to find what I had previously selected. Well, this looks a little plain. I'm not real happy with the way her hair is blending into the background, so I'm going to change the blending mode. If you go here on the right hand side, you're going to see different blending modes. Now, if you haven't used these before, I encourage you to go and take a look at them. see they all do different things. Some of them are dodging color, some are making brighter, some of them make them look ridiculous. There's a hard light. That's not what we want to do. That's a little freaky. I tend to use overlay or soft light most of the time. I kind of like the fact that there's a little more color in the overlay, so that's what we're going to select today. So now when I go and take a look at this, you see that the edges of the hair are actually here. Okay, you thought you might have lost them. You never would have been able to hand select those and get them off the gray background. But by using this overlay mode, now we've got her pretty well selected. Everything looks pretty good to me. There's one spot over here that I notice where it looks like part of her elbow didn't get properly selected. How do we fix that? Well, first thing I'm going to do is go back to the normal mode where we started, because I don't want these changes to be affected by the blending. I'm going to select the mask, and you take a paintbrush. So with a mask, and we'll talk about those in greater detail later, with a mask, white reveals, black conceals. I want to see more of what was on this background, so I'm using white, and I'm just going to paint. Sorry. I'm painting on an inverted mask, so I need to take that back. I need to use black. So I'm going to switch this to black, and I need to just go in and see if I was missing any part of her elbow. And it looks like that's all I was missing, just the little edge of her elbow. So all right, so we're good. All right, I'm going to go back to my overlay mode. Now that looks a lot more natural there. And I've got her. Well, what if I don't like the color of that background? You can create a new adjustment layer. Go down here, the little circle that's half black and half white is actually containing all of your adjustment layers. And I'm going to select hue and saturation. That hue and saturation is going to let me change the colors. But see what happens if I change these colors now that she's on the same layer. Well, I can't do that. I'm going to click this little button here to pin my changes only to the layer where I added the background. Now when I do this, you see that she stays the same because she's actually on an underlying layer. Tate is actually down on this layer 1. That's where we selected her from. So it's the new background and the mask that I put on top of it that is set to reveal her through there. But she's not actually on that layer. She's on layer 1. So now when I change the colors, I'm not touching her at all. All right, so I'm going to find a key. It's funny that sometimes going all the way to the left on these textures will give you something interesting. I don't mind the lilac, but I'm going to bring it back a little bit because she's got some red tones in her hair, and I want to complement those, maybe make that a little bit stronger. And basically, I'm happy. So at this point, we have an image. She's reasonably well pulled out. I've preserved the colors in the original image as shot on my camera, and yet I've added a much more interesting background than we started with. If we want to turn these off and see where we started, I think you'd agree with me that that looks more interesting than the other. That's it today. We're going to come back and talk about some other things in Photoshop and Lightroom on my next video.